Hello again, Nick Leifker here, and welcome to Week 6 of Operations Management 409. Week 6 is, what we deal with Week 6 is all of the topics that perhaps we should spend more time on, but unfortunately there isn't a lot of time to spend on them. Each of these could be a full topic on their own. We could spend several weeks each on them, but, well, we only have so much time. So I'm just going to touch on them briefly before we go on and finish the course in supply chain management. So, several topics that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about lean processes, how to generate a process such that the amount of inventory, the amount of waste in the process is minimized. So we're going to look at how to examine a process, through a value stream map and see what parts of the process generate value. We're going to look at how to change the process, how to change the business, such that hopefully we've created a much better company than what we had before. We're going to look at some of the techniques that are used in lean processes, just-in-time processes. Things like and-on cords, things like Kanban inventory system, and how those work. And then, so we're going to just touch on lean processes. Just-in-time processes is another term for them. And then we're going to talk a little bit about MRP, ERP charts. Now, to give you an idea about MRP charts, we've already talked about inventory management. All of those models that we use within inventory management imply independent demand. In other words, demand for the item by itself. And demand sometimes isn't like that. Sometimes we have demand for parts that is dependent on something else, on demand for another part. Well, how do we manage our inventory in cases like this? In general, the models that we studied before, things like EOQ, things like news vendor, really don't work well in cases where we have this dependent demand. So what was developed was what's known as the MRP chart. It shows the interrelationship between various parts for a product, and based on demand for that product, when does demand for those parts need to occur? Now, I'm not going to ask you to do the calculations for an MRP chart. If this were 410, I would ask that. If this were 590, well, I probably wouldn't ask it in 590 either. But it's a good idea to at least know how it works, and that's the goal of it. You see, MRP charts, Materials Requirement Planning is what it stands for. They evolved in many ways, because what turns out that information was really useful to other parts of the company. For instance, it's a good idea for accounting to know when we're going to be spending things. And it turned out that this idea of sharing information, well, that proved to be extremely useful to companies. And as such, it evolved into what we call ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning. Now, ERP systems, I'm trying to figure out the best way to describe ERP systems. They're extremely useful. They are beautiful if they work. The question is getting them to work. You see, there's issues that come with any sort of project management, any sort of IT project management. And we're going to talk about some of the issues that come with ERP implementation in this course. And so we're going to look at why the good and why the bad of ERP systems. And then we're going to look at this idea of risk pooling. Now, risk pooling, the way risk pooling works is it deals with some things that we've talked about before. That I explained before that standard deviations don't add like normal numbers do. For instance, while the average of A plus the average of B is the average of A plus B, if you were to take the standard deviation of an item A and the standard deviation of item B, that doesn't equal the standard deviation of A plus B. So the rules with regard to how those standard deviations add, it turns out that as you aggregate sources of demand, you aggregate sources of variation, the average, the mean, it increases at a much faster rate than the standard deviation. This is the cornerstone of risk pooling. The idea that if you are able to aggregate sources of variation and get them together, you need less safety stock, for instance, to satisfy a particular service level. You perhaps need less inventory in order to keep a customer happy, in order to meet a particular level of demand. So in many ways, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have a greater service level, greater customer service, while at the same time holding less safety stock. And as I mentioned, inventory is a lot like fat, so having less of that, that's a good thing. So we're going to talk about those various topics this week. And so that is what we're going to talk about. Anyway, be well, take care. We're almost done, and have a good week.